Welcome, ladies, and gentlemen, to your first e-learning day. We're going to go over some of the basics that you guys will need to know for your AP exam. Although there will not be any multiple choice questions, these will still be some topics that you should definitely know for your free response questions. All right, the first thing that we're going to go through is Java Doc Comments and Fonts. The font you'll see on your exam is very similar to the font that we've used in class. And the comments that they use for their methods will be extremely similar as well. The @param and @returns are pretty standard for us. The @throws will just kind of mention if there are any exceptions that get thrown. I have not seen any of these on a free response exam yet, but the precondition postconditions will show up. Preconditions are things that you can assume are true prior to entering the method. For example, all integers in this array are going to be less than 0. A postcondition is something you can assume that will be true after leaving the method. An example that could be after leaving this method, every integer in this array will be greater than 0. Identifiers are just variables more than anything. We use these for parameters, constants, methods, you name it. Standards, symbols that are allowed are letters, digits, and underscores. The only rule is you technically cannot start it with a digit or a number. They are case sensitive and should be self-documenting, meaning you should be kind of descriptive with what you're using instead of just single letters. Standard conventions, and for variables you want to use camel case, first letter is lowercase, every letter after that is uppercase. Identifiers for methods and variables should always be starting with lower cases. Identifiers for your class names and should be starting with capital letters, and then any constants are all capitals. We'll talk about those in a little bit. And then just don't forget about your reserved words. These are words that you cannot name things after. They will show up as special fonts or special colors on your IDEs. Primitive data types, the only three that you really need to know for the AP test are integers, booleans, and doubles. I would suggest kind of working with characters as well. They can be very useful when trying to grab a single letter of something. And then casting. Remember, just especially with data types like numbers, some things are free casts and some things are not casts, or not free casts. In the situation of integers to doubles, it's very easy to just add a 0.0. You're not losing any data. Whereas if we're going from a double to an integer, that decimal portion of that number just gets truncated or chopped off. When we lose data, we have to make sure that we are casting it and forcing it to know that we want this to work. Constants, or in this case, we call them final variables. They are just variables that do not change, and they're all capital letters separated by underscores. So if you look at it, typically we'll give variables or constants, we'll give them values at the very top of our program. It's not always necessary. As long as you give it a value at some point in your program, it will remain that value forever. Arithmetic operators are pretty standard. The new one that we introduced this year was the modular division. Just remember that means remainder division out of this. So that first example, 10 mod 3. 3 will fit into 10 3 full times. 3 times 3 is 9. That is one remainder to get to the number 10. Remember that it also works with decimals as well for you guys. And then down at the bottom, there are a difference between integer division and any other type of division is very important to understand. Remember that anytime a decimal is used in your calculation, that your answer will be automatically and freely converted into a double. Some things you want to pay attention to are the way that casting works down here. In the situations when you want to cast something, it only takes the single item that is in front of it. So in this example, the 3.0 is actually going to be converted to an integer. Integers divided by integers give you integers. In this example, the double means that this 3 is going to be converted to a 3.0. A decimal is included, so you get a decimal answer. In this situation, this first acts as integer division. 3 divided by 4 gives you an answer of 0. Convert 0 to a double is just adding another 0.0 at the end. Relational and logical operators are pretty standard, less than, greater than, throw in the equals as well. And then just don't forget that the exclamation point means not. You should not be using these to compare objects. For objects, content-wise, we should be using the .equals and .compares to method. Remember that you can combine some of these together with your vertical bars and your and statements to say, I want this and this, or I want this or this to happen. A lot of that tends to come up with short-circuit evaluation. Whereas we evaluate things from left to right, we might be able to stop evaluating early. An example is if you are using an or statement and the first situation that you test comes true, we will not need to test the second situation. Secondly, with the AND statements, if you need two statements to become true and the first one evaluates to false, again, there's no need to test that second situation out of there. A lot of times that can be very helpful when you need to perform some mathematical computation like dividing, and you first want to check that that value in the denominator is not a 0. Incrementing and decrementing is just plus pluses and minus minuses. There's a couple examples in here that have the plus pluses coming first. Those are more FYI information. You will not be tested on that come AP test though. Order of operations is pretty much PEMDAS with a couple other extra features in there. But again, it's pretty standard stuff for you guys to look at. Inputs and outputs. When it comes to the AP exam, you will not be required to read or scan anything from the user. If by chance there is a situation where something will be needed to scan, you'll see some notation like this, where they either tell you that they're reading that, or they'll oftentimes give you this IO, read integer, read next Boolean, whatever. But this is typically the notation that you will see out of those. You will not need to print anything either for your free response questions. So formatting will not be tested. You might be required to make a toString, but you'll never actually be able, or you'll never be required to actually call it typically. And then don't forget your escape sequences. This first backslash is the escape character, and then what comes after it is the character that's actually going to show up or print when you use it. Control structures, oftentimes I just call these decision statements. These are just if-else statements, reminders that they can be combined together. There's two different ways to kind of get the same thing happening. Nested if statements can be combined into just a single if statement where we use those AND operators as well. Don't forget about your dangling else. That's the situation typically when people forget to use their curly braces or they're trying to rush through something and maybe an if statement matches up with an else statement that you really didn't want it to. My suggestion is always use your curly braces. Iterations, just the standard stuff. Your for loop. Remember that we have 3 sections to a for loop. You initialize a variable, you test that variable, and you update that variable. Whereas a while loop just has a standard testing condition up here, and if it becomes true, you'll go ahead and run through your stuff. Standard stuff for your for loops. Do not accidentally double update your variables. Remember, it always updates in the statement itself or the header. You do not need to update it down here. And then for your Boolean testing, for your while loops, just don't forget in this one that you do need to update something or in order for your Boolean test to eventually fail. Otherwise, you will end up with an infinite loop. For each loops are not required for the AP test, though I think they are extremely convenient at times. A for each loop is read like this. For every integer named element in this array, I'm going to print out that element. The way I kind of remind myself is the name that we use right here, in this case, element, that means that every single item of your array will take on the values, element will take on the value of every single item of your array for each iteration. So element will be the number 1 the first time through, it'll be the number 2 the second time through, 3, and so on and so forth for you. Last but not least, errors and exceptions that you guys should know. These, again, will not be tested on your AP exam, but we've gone over these in class. Arithmetic exceptions are when we do something wrong mathematically, typically like dividing by 0. Null pointer exceptions are when you're using a variable as an object, but it has not been instantiated yet. Class cast exceptions, maybe I'm trying to convert a pig into a cow, and those are not the same types of animals. Array index out of bounds exception. This is typically when we have a loop that goes too far. It's mostly for arrays. You'll see the index out of bounds exception with the extra O, it looks like right there. But that typically just shows up for array lists and lists in general. And then the last thing, your illegal argument exception. This is when I have an incorrect parameter at some point in time. Like my parameter is supposed to be a bank account, but I accidentally fed it a pig. All in all, these are the basic foundations of what we'll be using, and you guys should be able to see some more of these videos coming up later.